Hello, everyone. I am Takeo Hoshi, Director of Tokyo College. So today it is different from usual. This webinar will be conducted in Japanese. So if you are online participants, you should find interpretation button. So if you want to listen to this webinar in English, please choose the English so that you can listen to the webinar from Japanese to English. So most of you are very familiar with webinars held by Tokyo College, so maybe no introduction is needed, but today webinar will be conducted in Japanese. So we would like to introduce Tokyo College in Japanese. It was February 2019, so 5 years ago. Tokyo College was established in order to make a contribution to realization of inclusive society and to generate the new wisdom and to be engaged deeply in a society. So this Tokyo College was established as one of the organizations for International Institute for Advanced Studies. The slogan is Shaping a Shared Future Together. We invite prominent researchers from Japan and from outside of Japan, and we have open webinars. Many of the webinars are conducted in English with simultaneous Japanese interpretation. But once again, today's webinar is special because this will be conducted in Japanese. On the YouTube Tokyo College channel, the video will be available later, and you will also use the interpretation. So interpreted version will be available. So if you want to listen to this webinar again, or if you have friends who are not here today, you can watch the video later with the YouTube channel. So you may be wondering why we are doing this in Japanese today. So on screen, we have guests. So we have the two very famous economists, and they are going to talk about Japanese economy. They are fluent in Japanese, and many of the audience are fluent in Japanese, Japanese native speakers. So we thought that it would be effective to conduct the webinar in Japanese. In Tokyo College, we have 5 important research themes. And I'm not going to talk about them one by one, but one of the 5 themes is Japan viewed from the inside and outside. And today we take the latter half. So today's webinar is titled The Economy of Japan Viewed from the Outside. So I'm going to introduce those 2 guests. They have a great achievement in the US. So they are going to talk about the Japanese economy viewed from the outside. I'm sorry, my introduction is very long, but very briefly, I would like to introduce 2 speakers. So they are a Japanese economist that really represent this area at the global level. No introduction is needed, actually. It would take more than an hour to introduce them in very detail. Let me start with the Takatoshi Ito. He is the professor of SIPA, School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. He is now visiting professor of Tokyo College. Before he went to Columbia University, he was a professor at Tokyo University. He was also a dean at the Graduate School of Public Policy. So many of you may know him. After he graduated from Hitotsubashi University, acquired PhD at Harvard, and became professor at Minnesota University and Harvard University. And he has a great achievement in areas of international economy, international finance, and monetary policy. And I want to really highlight his contribution to Japanese economics. In 1991, he published the textbook about Japanese economy titled The Japanese Economy. This is used as a textbook of Japanese economy all around the world. This original version was not translated into Japanese, but a second edition was published a few years ago. Actually, I supported that. So the second edition of the Japanese economy was published, and last year it was translated into Japanese. And this book is available at the bookstore, so many of you may be aware of the book. And the other speaker for today is Nobuhiro Kiyotaki. He is the professor at the Princeton University. He is also the visiting professor at Tokyo College. So after he graduated from Tokyo University and graduate school and got PhD at Harvard University and became a professor at Wisconsin, Minnesota, London School of Economics, and he became a professor at Princeton in 2006 in areas of macroeconomics, particularly the contact points between the finance and macroeconomics. He has made a remarkable achievement. On top of his research activity, he gives meaningful advice to Japanese economic policies, and he receives a lot of requests. So he is really supporting Japanese economy. So today, they are going to talk about what he has done in conversation with the policy makers. So today we are joined by Professor Ito and Professor Kiyotaki. This is a remarkable event. But one last thing I want to highlight is where we are having this event. So if you are familiar with the recent Tokyo College webinars, you might have noticed for the past 2 months, we have not only the speakers of the webinars, we have some of the Tokyo College researchers in person. We don't show their faces, but they are here with us. Today, on top of the researchers from Tokyo College, we have participants from Tokyo University and also outside of the university. They are very familiar with the Japanese economy. We don't have time to introduce everyone, but everyone could be a speaker for our webinar. They are prominent researchers and professionals. And later, we are expecting questions from them. Maybe some of you may recognize those people from their voice. Once again, I apologize for very long introduction. We would like to really start the webinar. So once again, today's webinar's title is The Economy of Japan Viewed from the Outside. We have Professor Ito and Professor Kiyotaki, and we start with the Professor Ito, followed by Professor Kiyotaki. Each of them will talk about the topic for 25 minutes or so, and then I will ask 1 or 2 questions, warm-up questions, if you will, and there will be the discussions about that, and then we are going to take questions mainly from people who are here at this venue. Also, we can take questions from online participants. Professor Ito, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Hoshi, for the kind introduction. Today, for myself, I would like to talk about the 4 challenges that's faced by the Japanese economy. So I will try to share the screen. So I will start with the takeaways. I mentioned the 4 challenges, and they are the demographic challenges and also the government debt issue third one is the collapse of globalization or decoupling challenges within the trade sphere and also geopolitical risks. So that's the third challenge. And the fourth challenge is decarbonization. Because Japan is struggling to become green. So first regarding demography, the growth rate is low. So there's a challenge on the supply side, and also the workforce will not be able to support the retired people. So there is an evident unfairness between the generations, between the young and the senior people. Also, from outside, some may question, why is Japan not opening its borders to welcome more immigrants? Maybe more people can come to Japan from overseas to work. Also, I feel that it would also be an optimal option. And regarding the second challenge, the government debt, this is something that's extensively discussed within Japan. So I'm sure that people have different opinions on this challenge. But the Japanese government has issued so much JGBs and the balance has increased so much. So what are the risks involved? And if there are actual risks, are there ways for Japan to avoid those risks? And obviously, there are. So it's either a tax increase or cut this fiscal spending or grow. But for all those three answers, the political decision has not been made. And until recently, from US or Europe, people would be looking at why is Japan inflating its debt so much? Is something going wrong in Japan? But after the pandemic, both US and European countries are increasing the debt. So the debt level is being inflated outside as well. So it's no longer fair for them to say that Japan is unique with a high level of debt. But just looking at the pure numbers, it does impose a big challenge for Japan. And the third challenge, when we look back to the first Trump administration, and they imposed a big tariff to China, and starting from that, the globalization rewinded, and that would imply a big disadvantage for Japan, which is a country that's really reliant on trade. So first, we thought that this would be temporary, but then it seems like it's going to stay as a challenge for a long time. So whoever leads the U.S. administration, it seems like the deglobalization is going to be a challenge. So Japan will have to consider what kind of measures they can take. And viewing from outside, Japan is a member of G7, and with the US or European countries, we try to be aligned, but regarding the semiconductor issue, Japan will have to choose between US or China, and that could happen as a potential risk. And that exposes the vulnerability of Japan. So can Japan make domestic investment? Can we grow more in Japan? Also, viewing from outside, that's the challenge that I feel is important to be addressed. And for decarbonization, the renewable energy in terms of power generation is not progressing much. There has been some progress, but it seems like Japan is hitting a glass ceiling. So with that as a background, how would Japan efficiently move toward decarbonization. And I think there is not a sufficient level of discussion over this topic. And as an economist, I think carbon pricing is the most effective answer for carbon neutrality. However, why is carbon pricing not supported by the politicians in Japan is something that I struggle to understand viewing Japan from outside. Of course, the US is also not advanced, but Europe is very much ahead on this topic. So this will be a big challenge for Japan. So that's the key takeaways. And as Professor Hoshi introduced earlier, we have this Japanese economy, the second edition, and I should have brought the Japanese version on the slide as well. But some of the graphs that I will be using are taken from this Japanese economy book. So if you have any questions about the data source, please refer to this book. And first on the demographic challenge, in sum, this is what's happening. So in 1965, so let's assume that the labor population was from 20 to 64 years, and over 65 are retired people or a senior generation. If that is the assumption, then 9 young people supported 1 senior person. That was the demographic structure. But in 2005, it was 3 to 1 young and senior. In 2017, it was 2 to 1. And this ratio is deteriorating. And in 2050, it will be 1.2 young person to 1 senior person, meaning that a little more than 1 person, 1 young person would have to support 1 senior person who is retired. And support means care, but also payment of the pension and supporting the pension, LTC and medical spending. So the premium paid by the young generation would have to support the benefit for the elderly, and that would have a challenge for the fiscal budget. And also this will de-incentivize young people to work hard, so that would lead to lower productivity. So I think this is a very simple diagram to understand. And from a different perspective, we can look at the demographic pyramid. In 1950, we had a very nice pyramid, but in 2020, it's almost like a reverse pyramid or like a beer barrel shape. But we have the baby boomers and the baby boomer juniors. So those are the 2 generations where you have a big size, but we did not have the 3rd baby boomer generation. And you can see that clearly from this diagram. And with this demographic change, what we can think about first is that the working population will save. And they will save and save. And at retirement, or right before retirement, they would have the biggest asset size. And then after retirement, they will be consuming that asset. And the savings rate will go into negative. So that's the basic model in economics. But it's normally the case. And that's the red dotted line is the household savings rate. In 75, it was roughly 20%. Right now, it's almost 0. And with the pandemic, it went up and down, but it's almost 0 right now. What this implies is that in Japan, the corporate deposit, our savings has increased. So that's why there's not much of a shortage of savings in Japan. But overall, the national saving, which is the blue line, has also come down. So without the savings, that means that in Japan, there will be less investment. There could be foreign direct investment, but no internal capital to invest in Japan.
Therefore, lower growth and inequity with pension and sustainability of pension these are the challenges. So the demography is the big challenge. So those young generation, those who are 40 years old or are younger, they are sensitive to this challenge. They do not think that they are going to receive the pension, even if they get their pension paid, the amount will be very small. So they do have dissatisfaction about the society, and that has to be resolved. In the US, and there's a incoming population. So this kind of challenge is not really the challenge for the US. Let's talk about the fiscal space. So the debt GDP ratio is the indicator that is often talked about. So this is indicator that is used a lot. It is about 250%. So we have the government has a debt 2.5 times its GDP. Argentina and Greece, they had a fiscal crisis. The crisis took place with the 80% or 100% of debt GDP ratio. We have 250% debt GDP ratio. Why don't we have the fiscal crisis? There are several reasons. We are still okay. The crisis has not occurred yet. So there are some reasons why we would say, or many economists say, this debt GDP ratio has to come down. And also, we have the government bonds. And when they have to be repaid, and those taxpayers will repay, meaning the young generation today, young people today, will have more burdens, meaning that those burden is carried forward, carried over from this generation to future generation. So the fiscal sustainability is really the big challenge that needs to be solved. So this is the fiscal deficit. So you can see the total revenues with the black line and total expenditures with the red line. After 1990, expenditures continue to increase, revenues continue to decline. So the gap between expenditures and revenues is widened. So the finance ministry says this is like a mouth of alligator. It keeps open, and they are not closing the gap. So the gap is really the bond issuance. So the bar chart shows a bond issuance. So when there is the crisis, there are fiscal spending in order to really control the crisis or a stagnant economy. And when the crisis is behind us, and then it goes down. And in 1997, it went up, and in 2007, 2008, it went up, and then there was a COVID, and there was an unprecedented level of JGB issued, and then it has declined very much. But my point is that whenever a crisis happens, and we have the one step higher, and we do not have the end in sight. And this is debts, or liabilities. So this is the cumulative liabilities. So the debt GDP ratio is 250, 150% for Italy, and other nations, they are around 100%. So the Bank of Japan owns more than 50% of JGB, and this is a stable owner of JGB from a government perspective. So we are not, well, no one is expecting a fiscal crisis, and also so the banks, life insurance, and also the pension funds. They also own JGBs, and also there are very small portion owned by foreigners. So we are not really expecting a panic sell triggered by foreign owners of JGB. But are we really safe with this status, with this situation? I talked about demography. So the households savings ratio declines, and then deposit and insurance declines. So there'll be less buyers, but there'll be more issuance of bonds. At some point, there'll be an intersection, and there'll be a crisis. That's the paper I wrote with Director Hoshi. But the fiscal crisis never occurred. So some people called us we are telling a lie, but I still believe that something bad would happen in the future. And a Bank of Japan changes policy, monetary policy, and JGB owned by Bank of Japan will be declining, and inflation target 2% should be achieved. Neutral rate is around 2.5%, and then there will be a more interest rate burden. So the macroeconomy situation will be different from what it was. So the fiscal discipline will be more required than it was before. The third point, so this is the topic that is difficult to analyze. Geopolitical risk between the US and China, potential trade war, and Russia invasion against Ukraine, and then it could spill over to the division between the US European side and Russia China side. And it has not occurred, but if it occurs, Japan will lose the export destination, and we will be in trouble in getting the food and energy. There's a potential concern. It has not occurred, but there is a concern. And when we look at WTO, there are so this is the rule-making organization, and they may not be functioning. And tariff violating WTO rule are being observed. There are tariff violating WTO rules. So the Japan has been a beneficiary of free trade. Now it is going backwards. It is regressing, and we have to think about what policy needs to be implemented. That is the third point. Therefore, whatever the country is, we have two big groups. Global South can be a third group. They can trade with both groups. So the Western countries and China, Russia, those group, and then Global South. If the world is divided as such, and how Japan should be behaving, and the policy has to be considered. That is the third point. Fourth point is the decarbonization. And so this is the greenhouse gas emission. And most of them are really CO2. And they are almost the same. But this shows greenhouse gas emission, how it has been progressing.
So we had the Kyoto Protocol in the past. But even with the Kyoto Protocol, nothing has really changed. And finally, it seemed like we were moving toward decarbonization. And then we had the Fukushima nuclear power plant incident. And temporarily, most of the nuclear power plants were shut down. And then peak was 2013 for GHG emission. And then from thereafter, in a way, thanks to the efforts made, the emission has come down quite significantly from the peak in 2013. So Kyoto Protocol really did not have a meaningful impact. And with the Paris Agreement, things started to be more effective. But with the Fukushima nuclear power plant incident, there is still a big burden today. So this diagram shows that chronological incidence and the trend. And this is the registration of EVs, how much has been registered or being used. So you don't have to look at the details, but in most countries, it's in the units of 1 million cars. But at the bottom, you can see Japan. But the unit is here is by 1,000. So you can see that compared to the countries that's on the top half of the slide, Japan is far behind. And this is not just for GDPs or other macro data. It just purely shows how much EVs are being used. So recently we started to see a gradual pickup, but compared to the other countries, the penetration is still very, very low. Also, is adopting EV the solution? That is not the case, because if you look at the total energy supply by the energy sources, we still rely heavily on the fossil fuel. Coal is still 30%, nat gas and oil is coming down, but it's not a big decline. And until 2011, Japan was thinking that if we increase the nuclear power generation, Japan will be okay. But after the Fukushima incident, nuclear became almost zero. So the green part is biofuels, and also we have the wind in blue, but it's almost invisible. Also, it's a very marginal share within the total energy source. Also, what's the future for Japan? That has been a big concern, and there is a move toward returning back to nuclear, but do we have enough time to achieve the decarbonization? So nuclear is going to be a big topic going forward, but is this going to be successful is something that we need to closely monitor. So Japan is making efforts, however, compared to the other countries, the magnitude of improvement is very slow. And regarding renewable energy, we're already at the limit. So the wind farm location is not sufficient for Japan, and also solar panel location is becoming scarce now. So that's what we are hearing. And there is no clear direction for the decarbonization of renewable energy policy in Japan. And to summarize, also we have the demographic issue, and then the government debt issue, and also the globalization and decarbonization. These are the four challenges that I think are the important challenges that Japan faces. So regarding the solutions or efforts, there are many proposals, but we have not seen a decisive solution that could work. Different economists have different solutions or proposals, but this has to be discussed in a serious manner so that there is a political decision made for Japan to achieve a breakthrough for these four challenges. So this was a summary of my presentation. Thank you very much. Professor Ito, thank you very much. So it was right on time, 25 minutes presentation. Thank you so much. So now we'd like to move on to Professor Kiyotaki's presentation. He also has a slide. So over to you, Professor Kiyotaki. Yes, thank you for the introduction. So my presentation is titled The Japanese Economy as Seen from Abroad. And since I live overseas, I think it's okay for me to say something awkward. And also viewing from outside, for those who are in Japan, the views may be different, and also I can feel comfortable in rebutting the general opinions. So, regarding what are the issues and what's the key challenge, I coincide Professor Ito's presentation, but my presentation will also focus on what are the policies that's in place, and as a result, how much or are these proposals achievable to improve the situation, or are there any alternative solutions that we could implement? So regarding the issues faced, the biggest challenge is the declining birth rate and aging population and declining demography. And also, the sustainability of the fiscal budget. And in order to maintain that, maybe it's easy to just cut the spending, but we also need to enhance the social capital. So those two has to be achieved. And as the Professor Ito stressed, with the tension in the international political sphere, how does Japan achieve sustainable growth and also sustainability of environment, i.e. decarbonization, and also stabilized inflation? So this will be a financial challenge. And under Prime Minister Kishida's administration, all the policies seem to be heavily reliant on things like subsidies. That's my view. For a declining birth rate and aging population challenge, there is the child allowance or education subsidy that's provided by the Japanese government. But it's mostly the government is trying to solve the problem by relying on the subsidies. But there are challenges with the subsidies. For child subsidy, the socialists and economists have done some analysis, and subsidies proved to be not effective to address the issue of declining birth rate and aging population. And this is because the main reason for this challenge is because the young people are not getting married, and with the child subsidy, it will not incentivize young people to get married. So that is the issue. And with the subsidies, in order trying to grow with the subsidies is something that the government is doing in order to nurture the semi-industry and also to advocate the venture business. And the government has allocated a lot of budget for that. But if you try to grow with the subsidies, the people who are good at allocating subsidies tend to become the political leaders. And when they fail, the responsibility and accountability becomes very blurred. So, for example, the government has allocated a huge subsidy package for the semiconductor industry, but when the industry suffers from the oversupply, who is going to take responsibility for that? And also, to start with, to do technological innovation, one would have to take risks themselves to innovate the technology or enhance the business. But and if you rely on subsidies, you are no longer a venture company. That's my thinking. So if you try to grow relying on the subsidies, the driver for the growth will become very weak. So taking the risk yourselves and putting your own capital is something that you need to do so that you can contribute to the society for a long time. And long time means for the next 50 years or so. So technology that can bring benefit for such a long time is something that we need to have, or else it's going to be a very lackluster technology, just a copy of somebody else's. So trying to grow by relying on the subsidy, I think, is a wrong strategy.
And another thing that Japan is reliant on is monetary easing policy. Up until very recent, the Bank of Japan had continued the quantitative easing and qualitative easing. And as a result, a real rate was negative. It was favorable for investors. But when we think about monetary policy, so investors cannot make money, and it has to be a negative rate, and it will not work. So the investment only with the negative interest rate is not really a good investment. That will be a wrong policy for growth. And also, monetary policy aims at not only stabilization of inflation, and it can really defer or the postpone the fiscal crisis. So if there's a continuous inflation with more than 2%, and the real value will decline, such as deposit. And also, if pension is not completely indexed with inflation, so the amount received will decline. And also, tax rate in Japan does not move in tandem with the inflation. So it's kind of a national, it's like a natural tax increase. So with inflation, a tax will be increased, and then spending has declined. So Kishida administration say they do not increase the tax, but it is actually hidden tax hike. What I mean by that is those depositors pay the price because the real rate is negative. So there's a tax imposed on the deposit, if you will. And the pension, the spending is essentially reduced. And also income tax rate increases. So it's not obvious manner, but tax is increased. So it's not really obvious or clear, but essentially it is a tax hike. And what is the problem with the continued monetary easing is that smaller gap between long-term interest rate and short-term interest rate, and risk premium will be smaller, and real estate price, stock price will increase. That may make many people happy, but if real estate price increases, then startup companies, new companies, and young people, it will be difficult for them to acquire property. So young people cannot buy houses. New companies cannot enter the market. In a long-term perspective, it can lead to declining production. So it was during the bubble economy in late 80s. It looked like the economy was doing very good, but the investment to increase productivity, young people buying houses, that is getting more difficult. If you are rich, then you can gain more capital gains. But stimulating the economy in such a way would not lead to long-term growth. Actually, there's a negative impact. That's my perspective. So so if investors cannot make money only with the negative interest rate, it is not really good for the economy. Investors can make money only with a negative interest rate. It is not good. So what is the effective economic policy in order to resolve the challenges? So in a macroeconomic policy perspective, when there are multiple goals, when there are multiple targets, so there has to be the same number of policy. It is the Mandel-Tinbergen theory. So you want to really use the economic policy to achieve effective goals. So that is the basic policy, basic concept for the economy. So what is most effective to tackle low birth rate? It is not child allowance. It is a promotion of immigration. So I agree with Professor Ito. So promoting immigrants is the, I would say, only way to solve the problem. Well, there are the arguments. It is controversial to accept immigrants, and there are a lot of disadvantages. But in order for Japanese economy to survive, we have to have immigrants. If you go to convenience stores and in a Japanese style hotel in a local area, there are a lot of foreigners. Without foreigners, they cannot really survive. And going forward, nursing care industry have to really rely on immigrants. So instead of refusing immigrants, instead, government's role is to really put in the system so that immigrants can find their place in Japan. So those people, young people coming to Japan and adjusting to the country is we receive foreign people when they are students. And I went to the other country as a student, and if they like it, and they can stay, and if they don't like it, they can go back to their own country. So those who like the country, they are very likely to make contribution to the country. So it is win-win. So my suggestion is to increase foreigners when they are students. If they like the country, they can stay. If they don't like the country, they can leave. I think that will be a way to go. So I talked about low birth rate and aging population. And another measure we can take is to have longer working period. Life expectancy is getting longer. So the elderly people in the past and elderly people today, they can have a different definition. if we draw a line at the 64 years old, there will be a less working population. But if people can work until they are 70, and society would not look like it is aging. So the longer working period could be effective. When it comes to sustainable fiscal space, this is the most effective, people working longer. So if people work longer, then those people who receive from the government, the number of them will decline, and those number of those people who pay the premium, pay the pension, they will increase. So without stretching, and I think this is the most effective fiscal policy. And in order to achieve sustainable growth, and there has to be technological advancements. As Professor Ito said earlier, so there are escalation of tension at the global level. That is true. But on a relative term, Japanese economy is smaller. Other countries' economies are bigger. So the smaller economy, and there are bigger trade benefit, and direct investment benefit is bigger. So from Japan perspective, there's uh, the opportunity, and we have to seize the opportunity to bring the benefit of the open economy. And what is important is that not only Japanese companies and people going outside of Japan, not only that, uh, the people and businesses from outside of Japan come into Japan. Otherwise, there'll be only outflow, less people, less investments.
Also, inviting overseas companies and people are key. I talked about the immigration policy earlier, but we have to have that flow both ways to achieve growth. But from China or Russia, some people cannot feel comfortable about those countries. Also, the political value, I think, could be different. Also, Japan has the democracy and capitalism that's built by the Western nations, and I think that's okay. But looking at China or Russia, and also the global south, the political institution may be different, but we need to understand what they want, what they desire, and we have to explore if there would be mutual benefit with countries with a different political structure. So this is a delicate issue, but we need to take advantage of an open economy. And also within Japan, there is the seniority system in the past, but that's starting to collapse. So with that as a background, how do we accumulate the skills with more people switching jobs? How do they equip themselves with skills, and how do we build on the insights and the know-hows? We have to try different things. In the US, many people switch jobs, and one of the incentives for them to switch job is that they can learn something new working for different companies. So it's not just the compensation that matters, but those benefit that they can get by working for a different company is something that's also important. So building the skill sets and also enhancing the professional expertise is something that's done most effectively by the private sector. Government role is to enhance the basic research and basic education. Also, government intervention is not always welcomed. And also regarding environment, I echo Professor Ito's comment. Also, providing a subsidy to avoid deterioration is not the right policy. Also, we need to have something like the carbon tax or other type of taxes to make sure that we do not see a deterioration in the environment. If we look at the EU, they have introduced those type of taxes, and if we try to export to EU, rather than putting rather than suffering from the tariffs in the EU, it's better for Japan to impose taxes themselves regarding like carbon emission. So there are a lot of uncertainties on how the environment and the renewable energy will play out going forward. And even if the government try to offer subsidies for the wind farms or the solar power generation, we do not know at this point if that is the right solution for Japan, because when I look at those projects, it's a very small in scale, so the subsidy may not be a effective incentive for solar power or wind power. So when we don't know what the right technology is, I think the private sector should take the leadership and if we just try to focus on reducing the carbon emission, I think there will be less distortion, especially when the future effective technology is still undecided. And these all lead to fiscal challenges at the end of the day, and as government responsibility, they have to stabilize the daily lives of the citizens, and that is a key role served by the social security structure. Because the challenge is when you are alone and you don't have anyone to rely on, you don't have the money, and you get sick. So for that kind of vulnerable people, government will need to have a safety net to support them. And even for that, it will not mean a huge spending for the government. It's more cumbersome to deal with the middle class to offer this and that, but to support the most vulnerable people, it does not require a huge money. Also, instead of offering subsidies to minimize the deterioration, I think if we have this uniform policy of supporting the most vulnerable layer of the population, I think that will lead to comfort for the citizens. And we also talked about the fiscal deterioration of the government. And the challenge here is that with the fiscal deterioration, the Japanese citizens will be concerned about the social security structure. Maybe things cannot be supported going forward, and people become less active. And also, if there is a downgrade on the rating of the JGBs or the corporate bond, that's going to be an issue, because if the JGBs are degraded, then the corporate bond rating would also come down. At this point, Toyota's corporate bond rating is lower than Samsung. This does not imply that Toyota is less of a quality in credit compared to Samsung. It's just at a different level of the sovereign rating. So with the sovereign rating is bad, it also implies disadvantages for corporate, especially those who operate overseas. And to this point, the fiscal challenge has been very severe, but still the interest rate was very low. And this is also a puzzling fact. But when there is a concern over the safety of the sovereign bond, then the risk premium will come up and the liquidity premium would also deteriorate. So at this point, the JGB rate is lower compared to the nominal growth rate. So some people say, like Olivier Branche, my professor, commented that. However, it's not correct to expect this environment to continue forever. And my professor also has written some different scenario in the back half of his paper, but the sovereign bonds rating I think it's dangerous for us to assume that risk will be low even when the debt to GDP goes up. And so that's a wrong assumption. And if the BOJ is the owner of the JGBs, some people may feel that it's comfortable, but if the JGB rate becomes higher, then they will have to also spend or pay for the BOJ reserves. So at the end of the day, that also implies a higher burden for the taxpayers. So before that, we need to consolidate the fiscal situation. And the most effective way for fiscal consolidation is to extend the working period for the individuals, because then the revenue for the government will increase, and then it also helps to cut the spending. So I think this is the most effective solution. And even if that is not sufficient, I know that there are different views, but the consumption tax, I think, will be the only solution because it can impose tax over a broader audience. Also, instead of doing like an invisible hidden tax like inflation tax, I think the consumption tax is more simple to understand, and there will not be bigger distortion. So with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Kiyotaki.
Here we have to conclude today's webinar. Thank you for your participation.